attendants have been stabbed.
Okay, do you have any idea where you're headed?
No. People at coach think it's a routine emergency. We've asked for a doctor, but none's on board.
Can you tell us anything more about the hijackers?
Yes, they have knives and mace. They say they have a bomb.
Okay, how are the people who were stabbed?
One flight attendant's okay. I'm not sure. The other may not make it. Oh my God, something's wrong here!
What's happening? Amy, are you still there?
We're in rapid descent. We're all over the place.
Can you look out the window and tell us where you are?
I see water, buildings. We're flying low. We're flying very, very low. We're flying way too low. Oh my God, we're...
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Henry Parker Presents. And with us, I have a very special guest, Mr. Christopher Bollyn. And Mr. Bollyn has written a book called The War on Terror, The Plot to Rule the Middle East. So Chris, I'm going to open up. You can give a little background on yourself and the book.
Yeah, okay, I was an investigative journalist when 9/11 happened, and I saw that the crime was not by the government or the media. So I focused my attention on understanding the crime, working on who was behind it and why it was done. One of the clearest conclusions is that the war on terror was the reason 9/11 was done. 9/11 was like the keystone construct of the war on terror, which made it operational. And now the war on terror is America's longest war, 16 years plus, and the most expensive war in America.
Now, in your book, you stated that it's I would say the blueprint began around in the 1970s.
Yes. Yes, it began clear proof that in the late 1970s, when Menachem Begin came to power in Israel, the arch-terrorist, he created a party called the Likud. The Likud party has been in power since 1977 with only a few minor interruptions. They're in power today. And it's the party of terrorists. Begin, Yitzhak Shamir, Ariel Sharon, and Benjamin Netanyahu. And in 1979, the Netanyahus had a conference on international terrorism in July 1979, in which they rolled out this doctrine of the war on terror, in which the United States, the Western democracies, into the Middle East to wage war against Israel's enemies.
So they more or less said, throw the stone and throw America out front, since they'd be like the bully of the world.
Yeah, the logic that Netanyahu used is that Israel is attacked by Islamic only because it is Western. It's a Western nation with Western values. Therefore, he says, the West is really the target of Islamic terrorism. And the West it's incumbent on the West to lead the struggle against Islamic terrorism. And if the West feels they don't have Islamic terrorism, find some for it.
Which they fabricated.
Yes.
So more or less you have Israel, I would say Western, and the Israeli, I would say, influence in American government that's all in cahoots.
Yes, yes. The situation is that we have the government and have lied to the American people, have avoided discussion of the evidence of 9/11 for more than 16 years now in order to support this war on terror narrative. And you know, just this week we heard that American soldiers were killed in Niger, in Saharan Africa. And most Americans don't even know what American troops are doing in Niger.
Right. Well, AFRICOM, so.
Yeah, all part of the war on terror.
Now, in your book, with the Islamic terrorists, they're like a moving target.
Yeah.
It could be Somalia today, Syria the next, Lebanon the day after.
Yeah. All that has to do, and the media, is tell the American people that ISIS is here or ISIS is there. And that excuses the military to go in and fight them. For example, in Syria, the latest aspect of the war on terror is something called operation inherent, and that is the U.S. military operations with 67 allies against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And so what the United States has done, under the pretext of fighting terrorism, ISIS has gone illegally into Syria against the wishes of the Syrian government, the ISIS members or whoever they call ISIS, in the city of Raqqa. And they've destroyed Raqqa, completely destroyed it. The Russian military chief the other day said that the destruction of Raqqa is not unsimilar to what the United States and Britain did to Dresden.
Now, with this so-called, I would say, undeclared war on terror,
Yeah.
how come there's no outrage from the general public to say, wait a minute, we're losing quote-unquote American lives, we spent X amount of dollars.
Right.
Where's the proof?
Right. Right. Well, that's the most peculiar thing about this war. America's longest war, most expensive war, and the least amount of public resistance. There is virtually no protest by American citizens against this war, which is very unusual. I grew up during the Vietnam period when there was a whole vibrant anti-war movement, songs, protests, what have you. Now there's not. And that is, the American people have been woefully deceived. They're misinformed and they don't understand the war on terror. But that's you can't blame them for that because the media and the government have lied to them. So the more patriotic, the people who believe in the media and believe in the government and read the newspapers are the most deceived of us all.
Now, this war has gone on for 16 years. Do you find it strange that each sitting president goes along with it?
Yeah, that's we had George Bush led off for 8 years and then Barack Obama for 8 years. And a lot of people hoped that this new president, Donald Trump, would in course because he was against the war in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan. And he promised better relations with Russia. But he said that when he spoke about Afghanistan the other day, he reiterated the lie that 9/11 was carried out, designed, or planned by people in Afghanistan. That's not true. And that's the fundamental lie of the war on terror. So he's kind of laid down his card that he's going to go along with this game. But I think that he knows better.
He knows there's a power that says,
yes. He said in his
we're going to make you scratch where you don't itch.
Yeah, he said in his speech, he said, my instinct, during the campaign was to pull out of Afghanistan, but he said that when I knew that when you get to the Oval Office, decisions are made differently. Something to that. Yeah.
Quick, fast, and in a hurry.
Yeah, right.
Now, also in your book, that you were stating that bin Laden is sort of, not made up, but they really had no evidence that the man was involved, etc.
Right.
That's a pretty good.
Yeah, well, bin Laden is very much like Lee Harvey Oswald.
Okay.
He was known by the CIA. He worked probably with the CIA under another identity, Tim Osman. He was well known by them, well known by the Bush family. So he was a person they could use, personality. And what's interesting about bin Laden is that he became close friend Gulbuddin Hekmatyar faction in Pakistan in 1984. And this is the time, 1983, 84, and 85, when Israeli military intelligence began training those Afghan and Arab groups that were aligned with Hekmatyar in Pakistan in terrorism. And that's what this group became, Al-Qaeda, in 1994. And Osama bin Laden was close to this group already in 1984. So Osama bin Laden was trained and armed by Israeli military intelligence with funding coming from the CIA and Saudi Arabia.
Now, what about, was it ISIS or ISIL?
Yeah, whatever.
It changes as we speak.
Well, yeah, it's the same thing.
There's also a Jewish influence with them, if I'm correct.
Yeah, well, the thing is that ISIS was the creation of Al-Qaeda that moved to Iraq. And when you understand that the core group was created by Israeli military intelligence, then ISIS and these fighters in Syria have very clear connections to Israel. For example, when their fighters are wounded, seriously wounded, they were brought or are brought to the Israeli border, taken to Israeli military hospitals, treated, and then returned to the front.
Oh, wow.
you have this Israeli connection going through the entire war on terror operation on both sides.
What I found fascinating in your book was the making of these so-called Islamic videos of beheadings, etc. Could you go and elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, all of the videos and information that we get from ISIS, for example, their videotapes of beheadings, what have you, comes to us through a website in Bethesda, Maryland called Site Intelligence Group. And Site Intelligence, an Israeli agent named Rita Katz. She's an Iraqi Jew from Basra whose father was a spy for the Mossad, Jewish lady. And she came to Israel like in the 1960s and is now working for the state of Israel in Maryland. And what her website does, provides the videos from ISIS, from Al-Qaeda, to the media. So it's like the media doesn't get this information. The government, the U.S. military and government and media do not get the information directly from it comes to them through this Israeli channel. And this is very telling because this means that the propaganda that's being released by Al-Qaeda and ISIS is actually coming to us from an Israeli source. All of it is. And what, in many cases, in almost all cases, the video ISIS or Al-Qaeda, she presents that to the public a day before the actual terrorists release it in their own country.
I thought that was pretty wild when I read your book.
Well, it tells us that the ISIS and Israeli connection is very indicating that it's the same source.
And I find it strange that no one said, wait a minute, how is it we got it a day before it's released in their own?
Well, the thing is that in this country, actually, there still is a deal of ignorance about the Middle East and Africa.
Oh yeah, that's an understatement.
These are parts of the world that are not, close by, and they're foreign cultures with very foreign languages. We don't, the U.S. military and intelligence does not have the human resources to penetrate in any meaningful way. So the Middle East has always been interpreted for the United States by Israeli agents. Israelis have always been the interpreter. So we in America view the Middle East and Africa through Israeli spectacles.
Oh wow, that's scary. Now, financial cost of this war.
Yeah.
I know it's in the trillions.
Yeah, the most conservative estimates are $2.5 trillion so far, just on the Homeland Security domestic front operation. But when you calculate the veterans' costs and the costs that will come down the road, it's double that. And so it's the most expensive war in U.S. history. And it's essential that the American people understand what is the real strategy behind the war on terror. Because if they don't understand the war on terror, we don't have a chance of resisting it. And as long as people believe the deception, the 9/11 story, the 9/11 deception, and the war on terror, as long as they believe that, they will be willing participants in this fraud.
Now, this is a rather odd question. Would you say your book is ahead of its time, where you brought forth this information 16 years later, and in a way, certain respects, it's not that they talk about the assassination of President Kennedy, and 50 years later, and people could care less, more or less because they aren't around, and the perpetrators are probably no longer here with us.
Right. Well, it's I've been talking about this fraudulent war on terror all along because 9/11 was obviously the kickstart to the war. But the war on terror, as I said, was constructed by Israeli military intelligence, and then in order to make it real, they had to drop the keystone into place, which was 9/11. So 16 years later, here we are talking about the war on terror is the aspect of the crime that affects us every day. It's taking food off the tables in America. It's depriving the American people of the prosperity and welfare because the huge amount of money and political capital is being spent on these fraudulent wars that are being fought to redraw the map of the Middle East. But it's not an American policy. It benefits for the American people whatsoever. So this country is being plundered. And that's why, I don't know if my book's ahead of its time or behind its time, but the thing is that it's an urgent concern now that the American people put an end to the war on terror.
Okay, now with the breakup of the Middle East, is that just basically about oil?
Well, oil is a big part of it. The purpose of this redrawing of the map of the Middle East is an Israeli plan to break up the Arab states into small ethnic groups, exactly like what was done to the 1990s. So in the recent weeks, we've seen that Iraq, for example, is now being fragmented along this Kurdish line and the Baghdad line. And there's a war going on right now, a battle right now for control of the Kirkuk, which the Kurds have taken. And then on September 25th, the Kurds voted for independence from Iraq. So this is the beginning of the breakup of Iraq, which may or may not happen. Syria as well. Syria is being broken along. The Kurds are trying to claim the whole area east of the Euphrates River, the oil reserves. And what we see in Iraq, for example, in Kurdistan, the Rothschild family owns the oil of northern Iraq, of Kurdistan. They've been piping it from Kirkuk to Turkey, from Turkey to the coast, Ceyhan, and then shipping it to Israel. And Israel then is reselling this oil after it's been laundered.
Now, we need to give you information out there. Most people don't want to believe it. How do you change? It's hard enough to change one person. How do you change a collective mindset?
Yeah, it's true, because the mainstream media has constructed this narrative, and that narrative is the narrative that people hear about on Fox News, NBC, what have you. And so our voices are much smaller. People, they're being shouted at. The lies are very loud, and the truth is very quiet. But Americans now realize that this situation is getting more and more serious. I want to see an end to it. And the only way, as I said, the only way you can end this deception is by awareness of the truth. And my Solving 9/11 books are available online or through my website. More and more people are reading that book now. So they're understanding the fraud of September 11th, and this is the icing on the cake. The War on Terror book is like the icing on the cake that explains why 9/11 and what the strategy is behind the war. And we're reaching more and more people all the time.
Now, I noticed you went to Minister Farrakhan to give your presentation. What prompted you to do that?
Well, when I wrote the Solving 9/11 books, I sent them out to leading intellectuals and people who would be interested in understanding. And I sent them to the Nation of Islam in Chicago in 2012. And then they contacted me about a year ago when I did a tour in the United States and asked me to come and speak along with two other speakers at the plenary session of Savior's Day in February of this year. Richard Gage spoke from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and Kevin Barrett spoke and about false flag terrorism. And I was the third speaker, and I presented basically the evidence of Israeli involvement in 9/11. And it was very well received. And Minister Farrakhan deserves a lot of praise and credit for being the only national religion who has embraced 9/11 truth.
Now, beside Minister Farrakhan, were there any other people like Alex Jones that you could have taken this to? But
no, that's people like Alex Jones. Although I've spoken to him before, back years ago, he doesn't want to embrace my 9/11 research or the facts of 9/11, because the facts indicate that this was done by Israeli military intelligence played a key role. People like Yair Shamir, the son of Yitzhak Shamir, play a key role. The Netanyahus, and he's kind of a limited hangout. He can only go so far.
Interesting.
He can't go to this matter. So I don't find a lot of people that are in the media limelight that want to address this, because if they touch it, it's like
their career.
They find themselves their career
done.
And it happened here in Boston. There was a speaker who had me on the radio station in Northeastern University when I was here about a month ago. He had an interview with him. He was the general director of an African program. And after he made the program on September 3rd, he was contacted by the head of the radio station and the powers that be at Northeastern, and they suspended him, and they pulled his show off the air of years of being
20-some years, if I'm correct.
An African-centered program.
Now, has that, in your travels, has that happened in any other states?
Yes, that does happen. Venues get pulled when I'm placed, like a commercial enterprise, for example, a pub or something. They get threats, and it has happened before that people who have interviewed me have been subjects. They've been attacked. There's been retaliation. Their shows have been pulled. It's happened in several places.
Oh, you must be doing something right.
Well, the thing is that 9/11 truth is a very powerful thing. There's a great deal of effort to divide the movement, confuse people, provide red herrings so they go off in the woods this way or that way. But I stick to the facts and the evidence, and understanding that our government and media are behind the lies of 9/11 indicate that our government and media are controlled by the same people who carried out 9/11. So we are in a very serious political predicament in this country.
So what part does fear come into this?
Fear is the main tool of the people who are waging the war on terror against us.
Mm-hmm.
They need in a constant state of fear, which is for me a very disturbing thing to see that the American people are so profoundly affected by this, because it's a deception. But they need to keep us in fear from Las Vegas shooting scenarios or bombings or what have you. Then we will be willing to accept the government's proposals
Mm-hmm.
or measures to alleviate the fear. So if they say more X-ray machines or backscatter machines at casinos, at hotels,
If he is
at
the money.
public venues, so that we become a society of cattle that are regulated at this place or that place, and it's a way to make our society more controlled, more docile, and more subservient to their agenda. And their agenda is war.
Mhm. Now, I would say with 9/11, that changed life as we know of in America.
Yeah.
Now, with these other incidents like the Boston Marathon bombing, in Las Vegas, you see different little clips, etc., or articles that go contrary to what the mainstream media says. Now, in particular with the internet, where you get besieged by so much information, how do you distinguish what's fake and what's real?
That's a very good question. Every individual has to maintain their critical thinking, and they have to be skeptical of claims that are made by anybody until they can verify it for themselves. So that when an eyewitness say what he or she saw, and when the government then says something contrary to that, who do you believe?
Right.
Well, if the eyewitness was actually there, what they saw, then you can put some credit on that. But that's the thing, is that there's always a government narrative that such an event, and it often contradicts the evidence. For example, down in Las Vegas, we hear 2 shooters. In San Bernardino, the woman that saw the shooters said there were 3 shooters, men, really buffed and knew how to handle a weapon. At the end of the day, who did they find and who did they blame? A small Pakistani girl who was brown, in handcuffs, and her husband dead on the side of the road.
Right.
So it's most of the terrorism that we're being affected by is contrived, fabricated, or flat out fake.
That's scary. That's scary. That's scary.
Because it's a tool. It's just a tool of public opinion. We are the public. We are the ones that are affected. We are the ones who have to find our way out of this deception.
Now, do you think at some point the truth will ever come out? Right now, the mainstream media, they're not going anywhere near it.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that a lot of the truth is already out. When we're talking about 9/11 or the war on terror, my books contain a great 11 because I approached it as an unsolved crime, and I worked on it for years, and I still do work on it to expose who's behind it. Who's behind the cover-up, who's behind the crime, who's behind the... And for a lot of people, though, things don't register as being true until they're on CNN News or Fox News. And that's not going to happen, because Fox News and CNN and all the network news and all the controlled media is of selling the lie.
Now, I noticed in your book it was saying that, let me get this straight, with the media, they thing,
Yeah.
and it's something else. How do we get them to, well, they're not going to switch, obviously.
Right.
At some point, somebody in the media is going to stand up.
Well, that's the thing is that the media in this country today, 95% of the media outlets are owned by 6 companies, 6 corporations, and these corporations are Zionist controlled, and they're presenting one side of the story, which is selling the war to the people, selling this jingoism, patriotism, and war agenda. You know, Fox News going on and on about the heroes that fighting down there in freedom. What part of American freedom did we lose in the middle of Africa?
Exactly.
But the thing is that the media as it's currently constructed, this controlled media, cannot serve in, it can no longer redeem itself. It can't come forward and say, oh, we're sorry, we've been wrong for 16 years. We're sorry we lied to you. We're sorry we didn't tell you, we didn't tell you the truth about 9/11. So we obviously, as a nation, as a society, we're on the cusp of this old mainstream media concept is falling. I mean, they don't sell newspapers anymore.
Right.
Nobody's watching their TV programs.
They get it off the internet.
Yeah, and so this old construct is going away. New media like your program and alternative media like yours is filling the void.
Now, how is it the general public, how is it the American government calling for an investigation of 9/11? Like you said, that they cut up all the metal from the buildings and shipped it off to Asia, which I was like, wow,
Right.
because you never heard a word.
Right. Well, again, the cover-up, the destruction of the evidence, won, and it went 24/7 ever since then. The media, like in the New York media, pretended not to understand who was behind the destruction of the evidence. Fire engineer, what firefighters read, was calling for an end of the destruction of the evidence by the end of 2001 in their December issue. And but and it was being authorized by the Department of Justice. There was supposed to be an investigation. There should have been a criminal investigation led by Michael Chertoff from the Department of Justice. But rather than investigate the crime, the FBI was involved in confiscating the evidence that was being destroyed. So we have the worst crime in American history with no investigation, no criminal. They called it an act of war, and they went to war. And not a day in court for any of the victims. So it's a travesty of justice.
Because you also stated in your book that how is it they were able to find the 9/11, one of the bombers, his wallet, etc. in the rubble? It's like...
Yeah, his passport.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the planes went into
Conveniently, I might add.
The planes went into the building. Incredibly hot fires were on the buildings, on those floors. Very little of the plane was found, if anything. Maybe nothing was found really of some of the planes. And passport fell to the ground and was turned over to a New York Police Department official.
Conveniently.
By an unknown person, a person who's never been named. So this is how they provided the evidence that was then used to frame the Muslim suspects. Because it's as we knew a week after, 6 or 7 of those men were quite alive and well, and living in the Middle East or North Africa after the event. 6 of them had been issued duplicate licenses. About that many had also lost their passports. So you're dealing with a situation where all of these 19 suspects had had their identities stolen, and somebody else was and leaving a trail for them, a false history for them. Now,
why the hatred toward the Muslim? Is there any reason for that?
Well, that's a good question. Well, there's a couple reasons. From a Zionist point of view, Islam represents a threat to them. The Islamic teachings, strengthen their resolve against the injustice that Israel people of Palestine. And secondly, the Islamic nations are sitting on a lot of the world's treasure, oil, for example. And so, war against Islamic states in the Middle East and North Africa, by doing so, the people behind the war on terror are enriching themselves on the spoils of those countries. Libya. Libya was the most prosperous country in North Africa. Muammar Gaddafi had a large cache of gold and Swiss bank accounts worth. After the invasion of Libya, all of that was confiscated by the
Government.
Well, not by the government. There's no government there.
I mean, U.S. government.
By the aggressors who invaded Libya. And likewise, similar things have happened. The wealth of Libya, of Iraq has been plundered, the wealth of Afghanistan, and it's a war of conquest and a war of aggression being waged under the pretext of fighting terrorism. And in order to countries and to steal their wealth, they have used this clever disguise of waging war on terrorism.
With this war on terrorism, what's going to be left? Because you can only just blow up Palestine and these countries. Just what's left? What's left to blow up?
It's really awful. What's you know, when there was a struggle going on for Aleppo a year ago, a couple years ago, we were constantly being shown these images of Aleppo and the suffering. Now, in the last 6 months or 8 months, when the Americans and their allies have been fighting in Mosul and Raqqa, we've seen nothing. We've heard nothing. But the Russian general the other day said that the American bombing of Raqqa, barbaric. And these are, you know, Mosul is the second biggest country and second biggest city in Iraq. And what we're doing is we're Kurdish aggression to conquer these territories, to expel, to drive out the Arab population and the Kurdish area, which is supported by the Israeli government and the United States military, and breaking up these countries, which is exactly the Yinon plan calls for. It's been the Israeli plan on the books since 1982, if not earlier, to dominate the Middle East.
Now, you also, previously, there were a couple of movies that came out that actually showed depicted that.
Yeah.
I've always said a lot of times in movies, they'll give you information that they're going to do later.
Right.
But people just think of it as entertainment.
Right.
And that's a pretty gutsy move to think of it.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of flying, you know, passenger airliners into buildings was depicted in a movie by an Israeli producer named Arnon Milchan. His first movie he made in England and France called The Medusa Touch in 1978 depicted a Boeing 747 building. And later, his business partner, Rupert Murdoch, made a film in 2000 about a hijacked passenger plane being flown into the World Trade Center. So he's had this Arnon Milchan, the Israeli who's at the highest level of Israeli military intelligence, has been making movies about planes flying into buildings since the late 1970s. Exactly the time when the war on terror doctrine was being rolled out in a propaganda offensive in Jerusalem. It's all fraudulent. It's all based on fraudulent data and as I said, you know, completely false logic. But it's what we're in.
Now, it seems a little, well, countries like this, and then later on, it shows you what they think of the general public, that they would make movies like this, then actually pull it off 10 or 15 years later.
Yeah, well, part is to, its ideation is to put the idea out there in the public so that the public has this idea that planes may be flown into buildings. Because in 1979, the head of the Mossad, the founding father of the Mossad, a man named Isser Harel, he predicted that to an American Zionist that Arabs would attack the tallest buildings in New York City. And that's what happened 22 years later.
Wow.
So the movie, the predictions, you know, the TV show prime the idea of in the American mind that Arabs are trying to bring down the World Trade Center, so that when it does happen, people automatically, along with what they've been led to think from the movies, oh, it must be those nasty Arab hijackers.
Hence, when aliens land,
Right.
the big deal.
Right.
Well, let's getting close to that time. Do you have any? Oh, where can they get your book?
My books can be obtained on Amazon.com or through my website, which is my last name, Bollyn.com. And I offer this book, The War on Terror. This is an important little book, so I offer this book for a donation. And with shipping and handling in the United States, people can contact me and I'll send it to them.
Okay, and with that, Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. Thanks very much.
And they stay woke.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.